We've heard all the reactions. We've talked a little bit about the fits. Now it's time to meet Anthony Black and Jett Howard from people who know them and watch them play every day, or most of the games at least. It's time to learn more about our rookies from where they came from. It's time for another edition of Locked On Magic.
You are Locked On Magic, your daily Orlando Magic podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And you are indeed Locked On Magic. I'm recording this on June 26, 2023. This episode will be for June 27th, 2023. My name is Philip Rossman-Reich. I'm the expert and site editor over at OrlandoMagicDaily.com. Of course, find me on Twitter at PhilipRR_OMD. On today's episode of Locked On Magic, we're going to go back over some of the reactions to the draft where there are still legitimate questions, but where people have kind of calmed down on some things. But then we're going to meet Anthony Black and Jett Howard from the people who have watched them all year long. We'll hear from Locked On Razorbacks as well as Locked On Wolverines to get the lowdown on the Magic's two new rookies. We'll get to all that coming up here in just a moment. But first, we want to thank you again for making Locked On Magic part of your day every day, no matter when you listen to us, whether it's first thing in the morning, whether it's right when we upload. We truly appreciate you making Locked On Magic part of your day every day. Remember, there's a great Locked On podcast covering every single team in the NBA. To search for Locked On and the team you're looking for, the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Before we get into our pair of interviews today, I just want to kind of reset ourselves here. It has been now 4 days, 5 days. I was told there'd be no math. It's been a while since the NBA draft. We've met the rookies. They've come down to Orlando. We've had the introductory press conferences. We've looked ahead to what this means for the team, and everyone's had a chance to calm down a little bit. At the end of the day, I think there are questions about the Magic drafting Anthony Black and Jett Howard. Undoubtedly, there are. There were always going to be questions over whoever the Magic drafted. It was always going to be an imperfect fit because this draft did not give the Magic a perfect fit, a perfect player that checked every single box. There was no obvious answer in the Magic. We're going to have to compromise somewhere. Certainly, if you look at all the post-draft reviews, including on our site on OrlandoMagicDaily.com, they will tell you that the Magic were one of the losers on draft night. And a lot of that is because they had 2 lottery picks, and it felt like they needed to do something substantial. It felt like, there was a potential to move around in the draft. There was a potential to do something big. But frankly, that's not how this Magic team always operates. Like I said, on draft night after the draft was completed, the Magic stayed true to their principles. At the end of the day, whatever opportunities were out there, and we don't know what opportunities were out there, whatever opportunities were out there, the Magic did not feel comfortable enough doing them. And at the end of the day, the Magic picked 2 players that fit the vision of what this team is trying to be. They grabbed a multi-positional guard, a ball handler, whether you believe Anthony Black's a point guard, whether you think he could play some 2 or some 3. They grabbed someone that can be anything. And yes, has a major flaw that he will need to work on and grow out of and grow through. But they picked a player that they believe can do a lot of different things in this league, that they believe can be a factor on several fronts and in several ways. That can be a defensive stopper. That can be a playmaker at his size. They grabbed who they thought was the best player on the board. And look, depending on what you feel about Cam Whitmore and who knows why he dropped all the way to 20, a lot of teams clearly felt the same way. So drafting him at 6 might have been a bad choice. Or it might have been the right choice. We'll find out here in the next decade or so. But the Magic felt like they grabbed the best player available. You could certainly say that maybe Taylor Hendricks was a cleaner fit for this roster, especially with the amount of shooters that are supposedly available on the free agent market. The Magic ultimately said, no, we're at 6. We got to take the best player on our board. And that's what they did. As I said throughout the whole draft process, the Magic needed to come out of this draft with a shooter. And they certainly did that in taking Jett Howard. they certainly did that in grabbing perhaps, if not one of the best shooters if not the best shooter in this draft class, one of the best shooters in this draft class. That cannot be argued. You could say a lot of things about Jett Howard. There are a lot of questions to ask about Jett Howard and whether he was the guy that they should have taken over Grady Dick or whoever. But they got their shooter. And at the end of the day, we still have to see how this whole puzzle fits together. Yes, the Magic have a logjam at guard right now. There's no denying it. There's no getting around it. We'll dive in a little bit more into that on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Magic when we start diving a little bit deeper into the offseason or into the free agency and the rest of the offseason. The Magic do have a logjam at guard and wing right now. And they're going to have to figure out how to make all these pieces fit and how to make sure every player that they need to see gets that opportunity to play. There are going to be, it's very clear where they're going to focus their free agency attention on. But yes, players on this roster are starting to get squeezed out. That's just the nature of the business. That's just the nature of things. And so, yes, in that sense, yeah, there are a lot of questions to ask about the Magic's draft. But I feel like we have moved past the overreaction stage. I feel like we have moved to okay, this is who the Magic have picked. This is what we have to work with. This is who we are working with now. And so now that we've moved to that stage of the proceedings, now that we've hit that part of the analysis, now we look at, okay, who do we have? And yeah, Anthony Black has the shooting questions. Jett Howard has the defense questions. Now the Magic have to begin integrating them into the fold and into the team. We will see them in Summer League. We'll get a glimpse. And again, remember, Summer League is just a glimpse. It is not the full picture. We will get a glimpse into who these players are and what they can bring to this team. But we have to be excited for what their potential is because they do have a lot of potential. And of course, I could talk about generalities. I've watched some tape on these guys. I've read all the draft analysis. I can only tell you so much. Let's hear from people who know these players inside out, who watch these players all year long in their lone years in college. We'll meet Anthony Black with our friends from Locked On Razorbacks, as well as meet Jett Howard from our friends at Locked On Wolverines. We'll get to that coming up here in just a moment. But first, it's time for a quick word from our friends over at eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with more than 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. When we come back, we're going to meet Anthony Black from our friends over at Locked On Razorbacks. After that, we will meet Jett Howard from our friends at Locked On Wolverines. Enjoy these two conversations. And we are joined by the host of Locked On Razorbacks, John Nabors, to get a better idea of what the Orlando Magic are getting in the 6th overall pick in the NBA draft in Anthony Black. But before we do that, John, how are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing great. Other than the crazy weather. It's been hot here in Arkansas and stormy and everything. But other than that, it's going pretty well. How about yourself?
I am doing well. We're excited to have Anthony down here in Orlando. Obviously, nothing but great things. It's as there always is after the draft. But let's start there. What was your reaction to Anthony getting taken with the sixth overall pick? Did that take you by surprise at all? You know, how did you feel about when you saw him go that high?
I wouldn't say it took me by surprise. I think I was hopeful, just like a lot of Razorback fans were, to see a player like Anthony Black get drafted as high as what he did, because Arkansas has had a lot of great players come through this university, and not many one and dones, but they haven't had a player drafted in the top 5 in forever. In fact, I think it was the last time that they had a player drafted in the top 5 was back when you're talking about like Sidney Moncrief, like way back when. So you've had some here and there's about, players getting drafted high, but with Anthony Black, I think everybody was expecting him to go top 10 because he was a top 10 caliber player. He showed it each and every game, and, the amount of minutes he played and the type of performances that he put in and the type of player he is, being his size and having the high level IQ that he does. I think that it is not only a great thing that he got drafted that high, but I know Arkansas fans love him to death and wish him nothing but the best of luck. And they're going to be following very much closely to him there in Orlando.
Yeah, I mean, everything you hear about this kid, it just seems like he just endears you to the fan base just from his pure effort. I mean, obviously the kind of reputation on him coming into the draft was he's one of if not the best perimeter defender in the nation. He's a guy that just plays really hard. He's got really good skills for a player of his size. From your perspective, though, what kind of stands out most about him from his time on the court? What kind of, I mean, obviously he's probably a high recruit coming into Arkansas, but what just stood out to you, or what was there maybe a moment there where you're like, this kid's an NBA player, like this kid's really, really special?
I mean, there's a lot of things people look at, but like what I looked at is he's a warrior. And, Arkansas was a team, just for those that may not have followed Arkansas college basketball very closely, but Arkansas had a lot of talent on this team. They had 3 McDonald's All-Americans, Anthony Black being one of them. And there was a lot of expectation under Eric Musselman, but they got hit with an injury plague. And they had one of their best players, Trevin Brazil, go out for the season, who was an NBA pick this year if he would have been able to stay healthy. Nick Smith Jr. was another guy who got drafted in the first round. Jordan Walsh, another player that got drafted. So they had a lot of talent, but they got hit with injuries because Nick Smith didn't play most of the year. And Anthony Black was the big constant. He was a guy that got a lot put on him from being a freshman that he wasn't supposed to have put on him. He had to play the majority of games almost every minute. The ball was in his hands at all times, and he got dinged up. He had some injuries to his legs and, to stuff that he had to do with his knee, but it never stopped him. He kept playing. He played through a lot of pain, and he did that really through the late part of the season and into the postseason, and just never stopped and never complained, never said, I need to come out of the game. He was just a warrior. And I think that really stood out because, listen, not every player is like this, but there can be sometimes if it's a freshman player who has to go to college for 1 year and has to play in a system and knows that what's on the line when it comes to the NBA draft, if they start getting hurt or dinged up or anything, they may say, you know what, I'm scaling it back. I want to focus on my future. I want to make sure that I don't have any problems and have people look at me if, is he injured, whatnot. Never once crossed his mind. He wanted to play every game, and he did play every game, and he was awesome. And so I think it was his warrior mentality, and also the fact that for a player that is of his caliber and his ability, he's known for his passing and all that, but just such a great defensive player. As far as being a freshman and a point guard, a lot of times that's lost in translation a little bit. Like you say, okay, well, you can score and all, but can you play defense? And sometimes it takes a little bit. But from the get-go, he was playing elite level defense, and you can't play for Eric Musselman unless you play defense. So I just think of those two things stood out to me the most, of just him being a warrior and his great defensive IQ at such a young age.
Yeah, I mean, that those are things that were definitely highlighted when Anthony arrived to Orlando, what Magic President Basketball Operations Jeff Weltman talked about. I know someone in the Magic media asked him specifically about the Kansas game in the NCAA tournament, where he turned his ankle early in that game, I think, and that those kind of moments stand out when it's a big game, your team needs you, and you got to give something. And I know he scored only like 4 points in that game, but his impact was felt throughout the game, even on a bad leg. And obviously, yeah, those injuries changed everything. I know a lot of kind of the draft people have talked about the Maui Invitational a lot, where Nick Smith was out and Anthony kind of really took over and really took charge of that team. But the big question with Anthony is about kind of the offensive side of the ball. Everyone believes he's going to be a great defensive player. Everyone speaks really highly about his basketball IQ and his passing ability. Arkansas was kind of a strange team because of all the injuries. Like you said, they didn't have a lot of shooting either, which I think hurt Anthony as well. But where do you see Anthony's offensive game? Obviously the shot was a huge concern, but he still found ways to score and be an impact player, even though his shot wasn't going down, even though his shot wasn't always there.
Yeah, I think that, I'm not making an excuse for it, but and I don't think he'd say it either, but we talked about him being dinged up and dealing with an injury. I think that really impacted just his jump shot overall, or his explosiveness overall, which, not to say that he had a fantastic jump shot when he got on campus, because I don't think that was ever the case, but there was just, you could tell that he just didn't have the pop to him that he once did. And I think the injury and the nagging injuries that he dealt with all year long caught up to him. So that's another reason what made him so much of a favorite here at Arkansas, is because he's like, okay, well, I can't maybe not be able to jump as much, or maybe I can't be as explosive, so I'm going to find other ways to score. And his ability to go to the rim with, being that 6'7" frame and taking on a point guard that may be 6'3" trying to guard him, he would be electric with that. And honestly, one of the best things when you speak about the Maui Invitational, Trevin Brazil, going back to him, he's a freak athlete, about 6'10", an insane player. And what made that so dangerous during that time is when Anthony Black would go to the rim, they'd have to do two things. Either one, they'd have to stop the 6'7" point guard coming at you, because he's going to go right in for a basket, or he'd just lob it up and go to Trevin Brazil. So that's when his offensive game was at its best, when he had that complement, when he had those players that could complement him. And Arkansas's two best offensive players by far were Nick Smith and Trevin Brazil, and then they went out. So he had to improvise. And I think that that's really what made him grow as a player too, is trying to be creative and trying to find different ways to score. He didn't always have, the games that some other players did, but if you look at almost all of his box scores, it was always amazing to me to see what it looked like, where it's like, okay, he had 11 points, but then he had 8 rebounds. He had 6 assists. He had 4 steals. He was a stat stuffer on all the stats, not just one or the other. So he's just he has such a variety to his game that he finds ways to be creative and get to score and however he can. But, the jump shot, you got to develop that at some point. And I think that he'll get better at it, but he's always just found ways to get the job done. And I think that that's what he'll also do in Orlando too.
Yeah, and that's something the Magic just organizationally have always really valued. They love, especially kind of, I call it like skill versatility. They love guys who can not only play multiple positions, but play bigger than they are, play seemingly smaller than they are. Like they Paolo Banchero is a solid playmaker. Franz Wagner is a solid playmaker. Now they're going to trot out, 6'7", 6'7" Anthony Black at point guard, shooting guard, maybe even some small forward, and just deploy him wherever they need him. Entering the NBA then, shooting's obviously the big thing. The percentages just weren't there. Some of it might have had to do with the players around him, the injuries that he was facing. But aside from shooting, what other areas do you feel like Black needs to improve upon to really be the player that he can be in the NBA?
Well, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing against him, but it was just, he was so good at doing different things that sometimes the things that maybe he needed to focus on a little bit more, or be able to go with his game a little bit more, may take second place to what he was trying to do that they didn't really need his help in. Because he's such a great all-around player. Sometimes they didn't need him to go for particular rebounds and end up getting a foul. Like sometimes they didn't need him to be so aggressive driving the lane and end up getting an offensive foul. Like those were the things that I think were just more freshman mistakes than anything. Because again, we got to remember, he's still an 18, 19-year-old kid. But those were the things I just felt like if he could learn that, when to pick his spots, when to pick his battles, of when he needs to go and do this and not do this, allow somebody else to do something instead of having to rely on himself. I think that that's something that he'll learn and it'll just develop. But that's really the only thing I can think of course, besides the shooting thing that you talked about, because again, he has so many elements to his game. I mean, how many times have you seen a 6'7" true point guard with the passing ability that he has? And he's got a great mind. I think Eric Musselman has said it so many times, and Eric Musselman's been around the NBA game, the G League game. He's been around professional sports and professional basketball a long time. And he just said that his IQ and his heads up display of all the things around him, knowing where to be, how to be, and making great plays is one of the best he's ever been around. So when you have a player with that type of mentality and that type of mindset at that young of an age, you feel like it's only going to get better. And I think he will get better, especially at the decisions that he ends up making. Yeah.
And again, I think to that point, like, he was asked to be the star on the team. And maybe he's not a star. I'm a big believer that a lot of, especially in the NBA where there's so much talent, a lot of NBA teams are bad because they ask too much of the players on their team. And so, Anthony Black settling in as point guard, or at least at the beginning of his career, maybe a secondary playmaker alongside a Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, even a Cole Anthony or Markelle Fultz, is going to help him out so much and allow him to put emphasis on the things that he's strong at, kind of learn when the right time to put himself into the game is, when the right time to kind of sit back will be. He'll have help. Not that the guys on Arkansas, because Arkansas was a very good team, but a lot of injuries. Mm-hmm. They weren't always able to give him the help that he needed. You mentioned Eric Musselman, guy with an NBA background. How much of Musselman's influence do you see in maybe how Black can be used in the NBA? Because, college game can be a little bit different, but, there are coaches that run NBA stuff. And I imagine Musselman runs some stuff that, some action, some things that Black will be able to do in the NBA. What kind of influence did he have on Black's development in preparing him for the next level?
Well, I think that one thing that Eric Musselman, and they always allude to this for Moses Moody, who's actually at the Golden State Warriors now and was at Arkansas a few years ago and actually was the leader of Arkansas's team to get him to the Elite Eight. One thing that Steve Kerr, the head coach of the Warriors, talked about with Moses Moody is that he's never been around many players that were more prepared for the NBA practices, for the NBA system, for the NBA mentality than what he saw out of Moses Moody. And Steve Kerr personally credited Eric Musselman and what he's done. And that's not the only player. There's been several players that have gone on into the NBA that Eric Musselman's coach that have said something similar. And I think that, you could sit there and say, well, we run practices and we get, that are similar to the NBA. We do things that will have people understanding once you get there that it won't be so shocking to you and not be able to understand. You could say all that, but what I think it does more so than anything is Muss treats players and treats all of his players, especially the ones like Anthony Black, as if they're professional players, because that's the way when they get to the NBA, there's not this sudden feeling of like, okay, well, this is how I had it in college, or my coach treated me this way, and now I'm having to be treated this way. It's almost like he helps them grow up a lot quicker to get ready for that. So that way there is no immaturity once they get to that level, and suddenly there's this learning curve that they have to go through. Maybe not necessarily just, again, skills, practices, offenses, defensive, all that stuff. Of course, that goes hand in hand because, like you said, a lot of coaches do that in college. But Muss, I think, more so just make sure that mentally they're ready more so for the NBA right off the bat than maybe what some other coaches do. And so that's why I think AB and then the impact that he's had as, because he's a great player coming out of high school. He's a great defensive player and he's got a lot of smarts to him. And that's all, a lot of it, of course, is about Anthony Black developing that. But Muss, I think, is going to be the guy that has really helped him to where the day he gets on that court and starts practicing with the Magic, the coaches and the players are going to be like, okay, we don't have to worry about, making sure this guy comes along. This dude understands it. He gets it, and he's going to be ready as soon as the season starts.
Yeah, for sure. And again, with that, how everyone talks about Black's basketball IQ, that's a big thing the Magic certainly value because they're trying to go positionless. They want everyone to be able to do everything. And so having guys who know where to be is really big. Kind of the last thing then, what do you see as Anthony Black's ceiling entering the NBA now? What is the best version of Anthony Black to you in the league?
I've thought about this myself, and it always comes down to, like we've brought up so many times, is just the shooting aspect. And if that offensive part of him can be better than what it is, because I believe it can, not like he's going to become Ray Allen overnight as far as a shooter goes, but if he can just develop the threat to it and be able to be a guy that people respect when it's out, if he's got a wide open three, he can hit it, or if he can create his own shot, he can hit it. If he gets to that point to where he becomes that threat, I don't see any reason why he can't be one of the best players in the league and a guy that's looked at as maybe even being a potential NBA All-Star because of his, not only his mentality and his skill set, but just the fact that he's very coachable. He's always wanting to get better. He's always in the gym. He's always wanting to learn more. And because of that, and going with the fact he's a 6'7" point guard, because again, you don't see that very often. I think the sky's the limit for him. He just has so many parts of his game that even if he goes on a team, or if the Magic decide to develop a team that's like, okay, well, we have a bunch of shooters, so we don't need you to be a shooter, AB, then he can find a spot and be really great. Or it can be the opposite, where it's like, hey, we don't have a whole lot of offense right now. We need to rely on you to be more of an offensive threat. He can become that. he's just so versatile to where no matter what team he's on or no matter what the team looks like around him, he's going to find a spot to be very successful at. And because of that, I think he's going to have a long career in the NBA. And I think he's going to be a player that's capable of being an NBA all-star, maybe in a perennial all-star, because he will always find the way to be successful in some regard. And it's really in all aspects of the game. As long as he stays healthy, just like every other player, there's no reason why he can't be a franchise player for the Orlando Magic going forward.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing. That's the big thing, obviously. And you see throughout the league, guys who play hard, play smart, defend at a high level, they find ways to stick in this league. You know, Marcus Smart wasn't the greatest shooter coming out of college either, out of Oklahoma State. He's found a way to stick in the league, and this guy that everyone really wants, kind of guy everyone really wants on their team. Magic have a lot of guys who want to get after it, want to defend, and I do think that Anthony's going to fit in really, really well in Orlando, and the Magic are going to give him a real opportunity to really shine and show that versatility. John, I want to thank you for hopping on the show with us and telling us a little bit more about Anthony Black. I know we're all really excited to see him play here in Orlando. If there are any Razorback fans listening that don't know who you are, they should. I don't know why they wouldn't know who you are. Where can everyone find you and catch Locked On Razorbacks?
Yeah, I'm on social media, Buzz John Nabors. You can find the Locked On Razorbacks podcast wherever podcasts are found. Also have the YouTube page, the #1 Razorbacks podcast by far. So I'm going to hold on to that until I can't anymore. And I know that, there's no NBA teams in the state of Arkansas, and it's kind of all over the place. But I think because of Anthony Black being out of Orlando, I think there's a lot more Razorback fans are going to be very curious what goes on with the Magic for the next few years as long as Anthony Black's there. So I think they probably picked up some fans, at least here in the state of Arkansas, for Orlando, which is really cool.
That's good. That's good to hear. We will take all the fans we can get, and look, they're all jumping on the Magic at a very, very fun time. I can tell you that much. So a good pig suey to you. I don't know if I did that correctly. It's kind of like Duval for the Jaguars there. I don't know how to do it correctly. I just know it's a thing.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us, John.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, it's a Woo Pig Suey.
Woo Pig Suey. I knew it was something.
Yeah, Woo Pig Suey, Hogs by 90. All those little things that people bring up. Go Hogs. It's all relevant, but it all works out. But I appreciate the time, man.
Thank you very much, John.
No problem.
And we are joined now by Isaiah Hole of Locked On Wolverines. Isaiah, how are you doing today, my man?
I'm doing all right, except for it's Seattle outside, which is not supposed to be. It's Metro Detroit.
I'm catching everybody when it's raining. I caught John yesterday from Locked On Razorbacks. I'm recording this on Monday, but I caught John on Sunday, and it was pouring outside where he's at. It like Florida, we didn't even get our usual afternoon sun shower today. So spreading the love around, I guess. I mean, rain's kind of important, I suppose, and Paolo certainly will feel comfortable there.
But we haven't had it up here. Whereas like I am a Disney person, so I follow a lot of what's going on in Orlando, and I constantly am seeing like Disney food blogs showing people rushing into different boutiques at Magic Kingdom because it's downpouring. We haven't had any rain. My lawn looks like Texas right now, so you know what? I can't complain too much.
No, can't complain. Let's talk about someone else who sometimes makes it rain, and that would be former Michigan, I guess always Michigan forward Jett Howard. Obviously, the kind of one of the surprise picks of the lottery. A lot of us had him going in the 20s. Were you surprised that he got picked so high in this draft?
A little bit. For two reasons. Number one, I mean, he wasn't expected to be the lottery pick that Michigan had. It was Kobe Buffkin, who was seen to be more of around 8 to 13 in where he would be picked. But secondly, and this goes for both of them, to be honest, it's neither of them necessarily had the type of production that you would sit there and say, yeah, that guy's a lottery pick. Jett at least has a little bit of an excuse to his name because he spent a lot of the season, even though he played in 29 games, he spent a lot of the season battling injuries. But yeah, I definitely was more keeping I was very happy that I pre-wrote my article for Wolverines Wire because I was more thinking that he was going to be, like you said, maybe not 20s, but I was looking at number 17 of the Lakers. I think I even pre-wrote it with, just bolding Lakers number 17, thinking like that's probably the good place for him to go. That's kind of where I'd seen him either going there or going more like 23, 24. So for him to go off the board at number 8, I mean, that was definitely something that I didn't anticipate. But you look at who Orlando has picked every single year, it seems like it's a former Wolverine. I mean, even guys that aren't on the team anymore. I mean, if it's guys that they didn't draft, they have them like Mo Wagner. Obviously, they picked Franz Wagner, picked Caleb Houston, they picked Iggy Brazdeikis. It's a very amenable location to former Wolverines. So it doesn't surprise me in the sense that it feels like Orlando had its eye on him and said, you know what, we're just going to go ahead and pull the trigger right now.
Yeah, and I definitely want to pick your brain a little bit about what is it about Michigan men that the Magic love so much. And look, I'm kind of in the same boat as you. I had Kobe Buffkin as kind of the guy. I even thought that the Magic might take the flyer on him at 11. Obviously, taking Anthony Black, who's also a ball handler, with their 6th pick probably eliminated that possibility. But I really like Buffkin and what he can bring to the table.
I'm sorry, I said number 8 overall. I meant 11.
No worries. We're all good here. We're all good here.
By the end of this, I would have been like number 1 overall picked over Victor. He's
jetting up that draft board one way or another. That's my horrible pun for the day. We'll be using that pun several times over the next 6-7 years, however long Jett is on the team. But going back to Jett's season, the injury was something that was talked about a lot when he came into town. He said that he had these ankle issues throughout the whole year, and he believes that slowed him down on several fronts. But how much did it slow him down this season, and what were kind of the overall impressions of his season with that context in place?
Well, I would say, not to sugarcoat things, it was certainly looked at as a kind of disappointing season given what his expectations were. But I mean, I do think he has a valid excuse, because it seemed like whenever he would get back into action after missing a game or two with the ankle injury, he would come out and re-aggravate it. It actually speaks a lot less to the injury itself and more to his perseverance, because the reason why he kept on re-aggravating his ankle and why he kept on getting injured is because he'd go out there and lay his body out on the line. It was never on just like oh yeah, you just happened to jump weird or whatever. It was because he was, out there making, contested shots, and he was out there getting in the lane and things of that nature that made it so that he was constantly aggravating himself. So, I mean, that aspect, it's both a positive and a negative, right? Because it's a positive because he's going to give it all for his team. It's a negative because if he's injured, you don't want to rush him back too fast, because he's going to go out there and try to do everything he can and may re-aggravate whatever injury or get a new one. But it definitely speaks to his perseverance, and it's the type of thing that his father, Juwan Howard, was always preaching about, which was just going out there and giving it all for your team. And Michigan's had weirdly kind of a dearth of that the last 2 years compared to what we saw in the early Juwan Howard era, where it seemed like guys were always diving for loose balls and hustling, and you knew that Michigan was going to out hustle everyone no matter what the game was. And you didn't really necessarily see that last 2 years, except for Jett. Jett was one of those guys that was going to put it all out on the line, and that is a big reason why. Now, when it comes to the season itself, and when you look at what he did, I mean, he averaged 14 points a game. I mean, that's nothing to scoff at, certainly, especially for a first-year guy, a true freshman that comes in and does that, earns a starting role right away. But he was a very streaky player, and I think in large part because he just didn't feel fully comfortable in his body. There were moments where he made it rain, where he was out there just really taking over games and doing things that you would expect a high-level player to do. But then there were games where it just felt like, hey, maybe anybody but Jett shoot this ball. And when you have an ankle that's bothering you, it makes sense that would happen because he's not getting the lift that he wanted. But there were certainly moments where he was the deciding factor of games, and there were moments where it felt like maybe he shouldn't be as involved as he was.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that. I know, Magic's president of basketball operations said this on Thursday night. Jett repeated this Friday when he came to Orlando, that they all felt like he had more defensively than he showed at Michigan. And it's interesting that you say, because like I watched some of the scouting tapes, and there's, definitely some concerns on the defensive end. I'm curious what you think about that in a minute. But The fact that he is willing to put his body on the line and again, he's nursing an injury. He's kind of protecting himself a little bit. How much of that, first off, do you see that defensive potential? And because we all see the shooting potential, we all see that he can be a guy that gets really hot from three and can change a game. But do you see that defensive potential in him to grow on that end, or was it hidden by the injuries, or is there something that really needs to develop there in him?
I definitely felt like he has that defensive potential. There was that wasn't something that I looked at and said, yeah, that's a problem, right? It maybe was at times because of the injury, but to me, he was one of the better defensive players on this team. And I mean, that's not necessarily saying a lot from what this team was this past year, but he was a guy who was consistently doing some things. And I would say he was miles ahead of where his now teammate Caleb Houston was at the time that he was doing the same thing as a first-year player. I never really felt like Jett was a defensive liability. Would he miss some assignments here and there? Maybe not be as aggressive as you'd hoped you would be. Yeah, but that's really easily explained, especially, they had him out there less for defense in some of those injured moments more than he was one of the two primary offensive options for the Wolverines. So with that in mind, I think once he's healthy and can really strap in and be able to give all of his focus to basketball and not have to worry about his ankle failing him, then I think that the better parts of what we saw during his Michigan tenure will be way more clear full-time for Orlando.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that you say that, because I think most Magic fans would say that the way that where Caleb Houston really shined in his rookie year was on the defensive end, with his defensive IQ, knowing where to be and help and all that. So it's definitely interesting that you say that, because I think in the draft prep, Jett's defense was something that kept coming up. It's probably why he was mocked as low as he was, and I'll ask you this question then too. What is Jett Howard at his very best? Because it's very clear we didn't see his best at Michigan last year because of the injuries or whatnot. What is Jett Howard at his very best then, in your opinion?
I mean, he can be an absolute star. But the thing is finding that ability to be consistent, because he's a guy who can create his own shot. He can hit from deep. He can take over a game, and he does have that capability of being a stalwart defensive player. I don't know that I am well versed enough to give you a comp or anything like that. I would end up probably going into being like, oh yeah, he could be a Rip Hamilton type or someone that would be from another era of basketball at this point. But that's actually not a completely erroneous comp either. He's not necessarily that same type of player, but he's that type of guy where he's going to be tenacious. He's going to be pesky, and he's going to be able to make contested shots, and he can open things up for you. That said, obviously, that's why we look at the 14 points per game, and that's not saying that he's going to get you 14 points every game. He's going to get you 31 game, and he might get you 6 another game. So it's just a matter of him being able to find that consistency, that confidence, because I don't know that he necessarily got that confidence while he was in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, that's definitely a really good point. I mean, and confidence is everything for young players, and obviously, a lot of these one and done guys get a lot thrown at them, and a little inconsistency is expected as they get used to kind of a higher level of play. The Big Ten itself is, I'm a Northwestern guy, so I know how physical the Big Ten can be, and how different that conference can be from the rest of the country in terms of basketball. We mentioned it earlier. The Magic have this strange obsession with Michigan players. You mentioned Franz Wagner, Caleb Houston, Mo Wagner.
You've got a dog appearing on your video.
No, all dogs are good. We like dogs. Right. Magic have their share of Michigan men on their roster. Mm-hmm. What is it about the Michigan program that you think fits the Magic side or seems to work in the NBA?
Well, out of all of them, I mean, most of them are Juwan Howard guys now, right? Not all of them were, though. Obviously, Mo Wagner was a John Beilein guy. It is that mixture of hard work, blue collar ethic, defense as well as offense. But really the unselfishness, that's what kind of carried over from John Beilein to Juwan Howard, was this idea of these players, they're not looking to get their own as much as they're looking to help the team. One of the tenets that has been Michigan basketball a little bit less this past year or two was that you never kind of knew who was going to be the guy to kill you, right? I think more of the late John Beilein years in which Mo was a part of that squad. You might be able to stop Mo, but you're not going to be able to stop Duncan Robinson. If you're not going to stop, if you're going to try to stop both of those guys, then Muhammad Ali Abdur-Rahman's there to get you as well. There was just a litany of different players where from 1 to 6, maybe 7, they all had their capabilities and their abilities, and they weren't afraid to take a game off from scoring to help the team win. I think that's a big thing, is that unselfishness that they have. And then they also do have playmaking ability, of course, right? You see that from Franz Wagner and the way that he's been able to play. And he's a guy that once he gets into a groove, he's unstoppable. And Michigan's done a really good job of figuring out in a game by game basis of when are you going to go off? When are you going to take that moment and not be the unselfish player and just, hone your abilities, use your abilities and exploit the other team. But Michigan has long been kind of formed as this quintessential team, right? It's not to continue to use, early 2000s Detroit Pistons analogies, but that's kind of what it was in a lot of ways, is a selfless team that didn't have one veritable superstar per se. Every now and again, one would come through, but even then, when we just saw Hunter Dickinson transfer to Kansas, and he was kind of a superstar, but he was still kind of being fit into this mold of you're still one of 5. So I think that's a reason why Michigan players would, like, no matter what their talents and how they excel, and you look around the NBA, and certainly for every, you look at, look at Jordan Poole when he's had his moments for Golden State. I mean, he just had his moments where he's lighting things up, and yet there's a lot of games where he's dishing it as much as he takes it. And same thing for Duncan Robinson, right? Duncan Robinson, no Michigan fan is particularly surprised at what he's done with Miami, because they've seen him go out there and have that ability to shoot the ball. But at the same time, there are plenty of times when he was in a Michigan uniform where he was taking a back seat. So I think that is probably the biggest reason, is just the culture that Michigan has had since John Beilein took over in 2008, which has continued through the Juwan Howard era, starting from 2019 forward.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, honestly, thinking about how Franz plays. Like, if anything, Magic fans are just always begging Franz to do more and more and more, and yet there'll be games where it feels like he's being really passive, and you look up at the scoreboard, and he's got 21 points. He's shooting like 8 of 13. Like he's keeping himself involved, even if he's not necessarily maybe doing all the superstar things we think he should do. And he, like him especially, like he's really good about knowing when to pass the ball, when to attack, when it's his turn, and when he needs to be kind of in the background or as a floor spacer. And that's really a big thing about the Magic offense, is they want everyone to be involved and everyone to be a threat. They have Paolo, they have Franz, who are probably the 2 lead guys, but they want an offense where everyone is capable of hurting you and making a play on the ball. Before I let you go, then, we're 2 years into Franz Wagner's NBA career. We're all stunned, coming off of Michigan with the kind of meager numbers he had. Are you at all surprised? Did you at all see this coming from Franz? And from at least what you've seen, what are the next things that you expect to see from Franz as he gets ready for year number 3 here?
Well, what I saw at Michigan in his couple years in Ann Arbor was that he's a guy who grows, right? I mean, he stepped into a kind of an awkward position being at Michigan, because his brother's departing, brand new basketball coach, and then he ends up being a commitment coming over from Germany. And obviously he was well familiar with what there was, but then straight out the gates, he's got an injury and he's got to sit down for a while. So, but not only was when he came back, was it a situation where it was like, yeah, we want you to do, we want you on the court. It was, we need you. In order for us to do what we need to do, you need to be a superstar and you need to do it right now. So he took that kind of, he had to take a little bit of time to grow into that role. I mean, they needed him right then, and he gave everything he had, but he had to kind of go through the paces to kind of transform into the type of player that he ended up being by the time that he left. What you said about him, sometimes kind of seeming like he was he's maybe a little bit passive, and then every now and again he'll just have like this crazy game. That was kind of what he was in Ann Arbor for a lot of the time too. There was always the meme that was going around in the Michigan circles of, okay, tonight we're seeing first round Franz, right? Like that was what the type of player that we knew he could be, and it wasn't always going to happen per se. Weirdly, I feel like that's the case for every single guy that the Magic has taken. Even the departed Iggy Brazdeikis was that way too. But Caleb's that same way. Jett's that same way. The only one that isn't is Mo, and Mo's getting a little long in the tooth.
Mo is Mo.
And he's funny. I had some funny interactions with Mo because he comes back every now and again for football games and whatever. I've had some really funny interactions with him in the aftermath, but he's just, I can't think of a Michigan basketball player that I've adored more in recent memory than Mo Wagner. Yeah, I mean, I think Franz, it's just a matter of him just kind of settling in and understanding that, hey, that thing that I do on any given day, I can do that every day. It's not a consistency problem. It's not necessarily even a confidence problem. It's just when you're looking to kind of pick your poison, when are you going to get to that point where you pick that one poison every day? And I think that's what Franz just needs to learn. And I think he's getting closer and closer.
Yeah, definitely is. And, another round of FIBA Franz is gonna go a long way, I think, this summer too, with Team Germany. Isaiah, I want to thank you for your perspective on Jett Howard. We're really excited to have him here in Orlando. We desperately need shooting. So anyone that can hit a three is usually pretty good in our books here in Orlando right now. So we're really excited to see what he can bring to the Orlando Magic. Isaiah, tell everyone where they can find you if they're looking for more on the Big Blue and Michigan Wolverines.
Lockdown Wolverines is the podcast, and wolverineswear.usatoday.com for all of the written word.
Yep. So I will give you a begrudging go blue. And we'll hopefully we'll probably be talking again this time next year, I imagine.
Probably. And I can't begrudge the Wildcats. My friend Lauren is the who was a Michigan intern who she went on and did her master's at Northwestern, and then she runs their SI site, I think, still. And I don't think she's doing that now because she's in-house video. So if you follow Northwestern football stuff, you've seen.
Okay.
Lauren.
I've seen her. Okay, cool. Well, I definitely appreciate her. I don't know if there's many others that listen that appreciate her, but we'll chat again this time next year when the Magic take another Michigan player, I'm sure.
Awesome.
Thank you very much, Isaiah. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I want to thank John and Isaiah for hopping on the show and giving us a bit more perspective on Anthony Black and Jett Howard. I know, I mean, I said what I said about the picks. There's certainly a lot of questions, but I'm very, very excited to see both of them play. I do see a way for both of them to fit into the bigger picture here in Orlando and certainly contribute a little bit to this team in the short term. So very, very excited to see both of these guys hit the floor very, very soon. Obviously, we'll see them here in a couple weeks. But that's going to do it for me today. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. Of course, follow me on Twitter at @PhilipRR_OMD. Subscribe to the podcast and Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Himalaya, Google Play, Spotify, Odyssey, and all of it. We send all the podcasts to your podcast-enabled listening device. For the latest on the Orlando Magic, be sure to check out OrlandoMagicDaily.com. You can follow us on Twitter at @OMagicDaily. On tomorrow's episode of Locked On Magic for my everyday crew, we're going to dive into free agency, the questions the Magic have for free agency, for the free agency period, as well as the free agent targets I would expect the Magic to be looking at. They're not necessarily names you'd write about in your newspaper unless a trade is coming. We will talk about those options coming up on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Magic. But until then, for Orlando Magic Daily and Locked On Magic, this has been Philip Rossman-Reich. We'll see you all again next time for another episode of Locked On Magic.